Hi, friends. My name is Nia Thomas, and I serve on staff of New England Yearly Meetings, serving Quakers across New England. And today I'm here recording a little conversation with amongst three friends about how meetings can approach pastoral care in the weeks and months ahead with the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm here with Mackie Schmidt of Northampton, Massachusetts Friends Meeting, who is the co-clerk of their Pastoral Care Committee. And I'm also here with John Calvi of Putney, Vermont's meeting. And John has a depth of experience working with folks who are grieving or have been through trauma and loss. And we're here to open up this conversation and hopefully lift up some important questions and insights. So I wonder, to start us off, Mackie, if you could just share a little bit about what pastoral care conversations have already been happening in Northampton meeting over the last month when this health crisis has been on everyone's mind.
Yeah, it of course came up very suddenly, I think, or at least in Quaker terms, for our meeting, and we almost immediately formed a task force to with representatives from pastoral care, worship and ministry, and some people with public health expertise to form an ad hoc committee to address some of the issues that we anticipated with the meeting house closing down. One of the first things that group did, with the participation of both pastoral care and worship and ministry, was set up a Zoom platform to hold meeting for worship and our midweek meeting for worship. It has since been used for 9:30 hours, our adult education hour, and another, on someone else's account, another group for committee meetings, and that's worked really well. We also developed a phone tree for people in our meeting that is to be used for really just urgent messages. We have an email list which works really well for more routine things, but if there was something really urgent that we needed to get out to the entire meeting, we would use this phone tree. And that's we haven't had to use it yet, but I send it out regularly. The other thing that we have done is to have a single email go out from me. I gather information from various committees and individuals in the meeting that they would like schedule changes, things like that, updates to adult education, and practical things about the meeting and the meeting house itself. And those I send out generally once or twice a week, really. It hasn't been very often. We decided to limit it to that rather than more broad information about public health and health precautions you can take, because people are getting that everywhere, and they certainly don't need to get it from us. But it's just things like technical help if you're having trouble loading Zoom and things like that. And we have also just done outreach to people at meeting that we haven't seen for a while, just to check in and let them know what's going on, both by phone and email, and sometimes Zoom if the person has access. One of the great joys of meeting by Zoom is that we've seen people that we haven't seen for a long time because of distance or their inability for some other reason to get to the meeting house. So they've been able to join us, and that's been really nice. And also some friends who moved away that we don't see at all, really, and so we've seen a few of those too, and it's just been wonderful. Yeah, so that's sort of what we've been doing and how we've been handling it. We've also advertised our assistance fund for people who are maybe facing a financial loss at this. So we're reminding friends of that.
Yeah. Well, that just sounds like such an incredible amount of sort of getting systems in place and communicating about new changes. And as we're thinking about pastoral care today, one of the things that's on my mind is even with all these systems in place, another thing that we're maybe anticipating is that there might be, losses or hardship coming, where there are needs for families or individuals that go beyond just sort of joining for worship. And I'm wondering, are there questions or concerns that the Pastoral Care Committee or you have been holding as you sort of look forward at what might be coming in the next few months?
Yes, of course. It's been we are anticipating some of those, and it's hard to know what they'll look like. Our meeting has had a couple of big losses in the past year or two, and so we feel like we've made some pretty strong connections that way and gained some skills with helping people through those. I think this is going to be slightly different. So yeah, we're anticipating that and just sort of hoping it doesn't happen, but understanding that it very likely will, or something like it will in the future. Mm. Yeah, and we're hoping John can give us some help.
Well, I'm happy to be of some help, and everything you have talked about sounds wonderful and efficient and caring and very good. And I'm glad you've attended to so much detail so well. I think one of the interesting things about an epidemic is that at the beginning, you spend a lot of time, you're still looking for information. And some of the information that comes forward doesn't seem to match. The other day, I read that in Iceland, for every person who has been infected, only 50% of the people are showing any symptoms at all. Now, that's a very sort of interesting way to do an epidemic. I don't know of it happening that way with other kinds of infections before. And certainly the Quaker demographic we tend to be old. Quakers tend to be old. We have lots of young people. They drift off and then they come back. But folks who are showing up tend to be an older group, and this is a particularly vulnerable group for this epidemic. So I think one of the first things that occurs to me is that it would be very important for every ministry and council committee to sit down together and do an inventory. Who of us has been doing death and dying work? Who of us have had sudden loss and we're still doing some grieving? Which of us are afraid of contagion? Which of us have confidence into going into something like this because of some history or other? And to be very clear about the gut level feelings we have about such a challenge. Faith is a wonderful thing, and it's even better when you've done an emotional inventory to see what your gut feeling is about the troubles coming up. The other thing about this particular epidemic, the idea that it is so transmissible. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before. With AIDS, you had sex and shooting drugs, which was you didn't have to enter the lottery very easily. You didn't have to get into this group very easily at all. You could get in with one ticket. But with this, someone can sneeze, and 2 minutes later, you walk through that space where the sneeze was, and ba-boom, you are a member of the club. So this is something which is moving very quickly, and for which people can be careful and still get into a lot of trouble very quickly. So I think it'd be very good for people in ministry and counsel and others looking to be of help in the meeting to be able to honestly say, oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And to be clear about that early in the beginning. And to see what we can do about not becoming dysfunctional around being overwhelmed. If we can own up to it early on and say, I need some rest, I need to delegate, I need to postpone, I need not to take on that other extra piece of work right now. And to do that, instead of getting caught with too much anger, or getting caught with too much fear, or getting caught with too much sadness. To get caught with any of those things can mean that it screws up communications. And of course, the nice thing about that is you can always apologize and then go back to work. But if you can say, I need to pull down into the slow lane for just a little bit, that will save a lot of broken glass along the road. I think another potential pitfall for ministry and counsel is to enter into a situation where you might become, a member might become a primary caregiver. Now, in a small meeting or when you're particularly close to people, that might happen very naturally. But generally speaking, I think we're going to see so much need, so much potential need, that it would be important for members of ministry and counsel not to become primary caregivers of individuals, because that can lead to a lot of exhaustion very quickly. Yes.
Thank you. Those are really practical, and there are sort of dimensions of this that we really hadn't, my committee really hadn't thought about too much, and it's good to know. We have discussed the problem of having to step back a little bit or take a break, and we're all sort of suffering from Zoom overload right now. So yeah, not having screen time has been important, but yeah, those are all very good, John. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yes, this whole thing of being in touch by technology is really quite strange. And I have to say that I need to go and take a walk outside and especially be under large trees to sort of recover from it. It's just peculiar. It makes me feel very Star Trek, and I don't want to really.
Yeah.
One thing that you said that sort of jumped out to me, John, is about not becoming a primary caregiver if that's not sustainable. And I'm just wondering about as informal or formal pastoral caregivers at meetings kind of hear about needs, hear about people who are maybe facing multiple hardships. If you have any insights into how they might sort of create a healthy framework for, or a sustainable framework for knowing what's their work to do versus what's sort of beyond what a meeting can offer?
Yes. Well, in my experience, one of the main sources of conflicts within meeting is when people think of their meeting as their family. The obligations of a family and the obligations of a meeting are really quite different. Now, we do have that close and important connection, and there's a great deal of affection and trust and intimacy within a meeting. But to be making an assumption that they are meetings and families are the same thing, that really gets into messy difficulties when there's disappointment, when needs aren't met. And so what I would like to suggest is that a meeting's responsibility to an individual who is ill and in need may very well be to make a complete assessment as to what all the moving pieces are here and what's needed, and then to look and see what are the resources of this person. Is there family? Are there close friendships? Who's living nearby? And what are the possibilities there? And not to assume that the meeting is going to attend to everything, but to take a broad look at it. Now, may very well be that you're going to find someone who has a great deal of need and not very many resources. But we experience that outside of the epidemic in every meeting with our eccentrics. And Quakers are, God help us, famous for our eccentrics. And sometimes they're called the people who are undiagnosed. And we find our ways of connecting with them and meeting some needs for them without exhausting the meeting, hopefully, sometimes. And this will be a similar sort of a thing, but in a different framework. And so, you know, we want to take a look at what's necessary.
I have noticed in this that one really big thing that we can satisfy is just connection, just checking with people. I'm so impressed with how far that goes with someone who's feeling lonely or frightened right now, aside from whatever other issues they may have. Just knowing that someone has reached out to them for a conversation or a phone call makes a big difference.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
The world is essentially run by the 10% of the people who show up. And if one of those people who shows up is cheery and has a nice smile and says, hello, how you doing? All of a sudden things are working better. And certainly when we come into trouble times, into crisis, that becomes even more true. So whoever either has that naturally as their disposition, or they can work up to it as is needed, which is what I need to do, because I'm not naturally a nice person. But I can be nice for a certain amount of time if I need to be, if someone's in need. Yes.
Right. And I think that is helpful for me in thinking about sort of as these pastoral care committees or ministering council committees or whoever it is, sort of thinking about how they care for their flock, even if there are people on those committees who, you know, don't have experience or comfort with, you know, being with people who are, you know, sick or grieving. They're the people who could maybe reach out to the person who's lonely and isolated, you know, and be available to them. I'm wondering, John, you know, for myself as someone who doesn't have a whole lot of experience accompanying people through challenging loss, if you could just speak a little bit about that sort of accompaniment and what the experience might be like for friends who are called to that or are pushed towards that at this time.
Well, do you know, I think in this particular epidemic, this virus, it appears to be merciless. We are going to see millions of people die. And some of them are going to be us, and some of them are going to be people that we know and people that we love. And I think there is going to be a great deal of witness that goes on here. And friends are famous for being some of the first people to run to the fire with water, which is a great heritage. Now, for some folks, they've never run to a fire like this before, and they've never carried this kind of water before. A lot of the work is simple listening. And someone who is frightened of dying or frightened of losing a loved one, often what they need is to be able to speak to someone and to have that person not become as frightened as they are. Now that's a very particular work. It's a specific work. It's fairly simple, actually. The boundaries to it are pretty exacting. But it does mean being able to know your own history of your response to loss, whether or not you have some grieving that you yourself are just still doing, to be in touch with that. My friend Bill Kreidler, who died with AIDS 20 years ago, his birthday was yesterday, and I have been thinking about him and feeling very tender about him. To be in touch with those feelings ahead of time, when you go in to be of help to someone, is an important knowledge to have. If you don't have much history with something like this, there's a wonderful Quaker tradition of saying, I feel the need, or the situation has come to me to where I'm going to go and be of service to someone. And within the French tradition, that means that you're following some light, and that experience is going to change you. It's going to change you, and you are going to learn more. It's going to be different later. When I began work in the AIDS epidemic in 1983, my family was terrified. But my friends who were old Quaker ladies said, you have found some trouble you're going to go and get into. And you're going to learn things, and it's going to change you. And that is as it should be. And that was very important to know ahead of time going into it. Yes. With some reverence, it's all of it holy work.
Thank you for sharing that. So, Mackie, this is brought up so much that is tender, and I think for many of us frightening. And I know that you are getting ready to meet with your pastoral care committee soon, and I'm wondering if can I put you on the spot a little bit and maybe just share for us in this conversation a little bit about how anything that's come up today might be informing how you approach kind of working with that team at this time.
Yeah, I think particularly the notion of not overextending ourselves, taking those steps back, and I think at this point there's a little less urgency than there was even a week ago. It feels a little more like we've put the biggest fires out, and now we're just sort of addressing smaller things and more routine things, and we know that something big will come up again. And I think that the idea that remembering that we will need to step back a little bit as individuals, and I'm also thinking after listening to you, John, that it might be a good idea even to find other people in the meeting who have these skills, may not be a member of pastoral care, but may be willing to help us address them. I'm thinking, people who have chaplaincy experience or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be really big, and to remind friends that this is holy work, and that we should approach it as that, and remember to bring that spirit with us when we're doing this.
Yeah, and John, what was standing out to me and what you shared is just the importance of being really staying in touch with yourself and
Yeah.
how you're doing, and also communicating that to the people that you're working with, whatever
Yeah.
your team is at this time.
Yes, we need to become a little bit more emotionally flexible. And this can be a problem for friends because Quakerism is a British form, and they are not known for their bursts of emotion. If George Fox had been Italian, this whole thing would be different. And as someone who is Italian on both sides of the family, I can tell you that the capacity, my capacity, to go into my sadness or into my anger, or into my delight, and to be fluid with those things, is absolutely vital when you're working in a crisis, and to welcome that openness with other people also.
Mm.
I think the other thing that was important that you mentioned was the inventory of the people around us, not just in terms of their immediate needs for food, shelter, or even consolation, but people who just may be feeling particularly worried or scared right now, and reaching out to them and not waiting for them to reach out to us, which is often what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I wonder, before we wrap up this conversation, if any of you, either of you, have any other sort of closing reflections that you'd like to share.
Well, I'm very grateful that you're doing this. This is wonderful. We are setting things up ahead of time. We know something is on its way. Good. Thank you very much.
Yes, and I think, as we mentioned this in our ad hoc committee today, a lot of the things that we're setting up to address this situation, some of these things we will probably carry on after this is calmed down. The notion of this kind of communication with people that we can't necessarily see face to face, I think will be very useful in the future. And I don't know, this is just one last comment. I have noticed in Meeting for Worship, we sit here with 25 faces on the screen, and usually people have their eyes closed, but with those faces on the screen, everybody looks at the faces, and when you see somebody that you know or you haven't seen for a while, you smile, and nobody knows who you're smiling at, so they all smile back, and that part has been really lovely.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you both for this time, and I'm especially grateful for the reminder that we're setting ourselves up, and not for perfection, but for presence. Yeah, I think that's important to hold on to. I also want to just remind folks listening to this that if you're interested in continuing this conversation, the yearly meeting has set up an online forum for discussion using Slack. You can check out our website to join that, neym.org. There are also resources specifically around pastoral care in these times on that website. Just a reminder to folks that we're offering weekly Tuesday evening check-ins for meeting leaders, which could certainly include folks serving in pastoral care roles. Those are opportunities to stay up to date about resources that are available, and also to find small groups for conversation and mutual support. So thank you so much to Mackie and John for being available for this conversation. And thank you to all the friends who are listening and caring for your meetings. Take care.
Bye-bye.